Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds joins us now from South Wales. Thank you for being on the programme today. We've just been listening to Grant Shapps. Of course, there's legitimate questions about whether the government was too slow locking down, too slow ramping up testing, getting protective equipment to the front line. But at the same time, this is the week where they've hit their target to get 100,000 tests. We heard Grant Shapps there laying out this idea of a new app and a new contact tracing system that could be a way out of lockdown. Would you give any credit to the progress that the government's made recently?
Well, we've been asking for the ramping up of testing for some weeks, so clearly I'm pleased that testing has been ramped up. I think there's always been a difference between the number of tests actually carried out and the overall statistics, and indeed the number of people tested is a different figure. But of course I'm pleased that testing has been ramped up. But that in itself is not a strategy. Firstly, the testing has to be increased further. I mean, the original target, we were talking about 250,000 tests a day some time ago, but it has to be linked, as you indicated in your question, Sophie, to tracing as well. And it's that testing and tracing that is going to be so important now in terms of easing the measures of the lockdown in the weeks and months ahead.
OK, well, you're talking there about the potential for lockdown and a route out of the situation we're in at the minute. That's going to come up for review next week. Do you think that the measures should be eased?
Well, we will support, as always, what the best public health advice actually says. And I do welcome the fact that last week the Prime Minister has indicated that he has listened to what we've been saying about publishing an exit strategy, and that is going to be extremely important. It's going to be important both to be open with the public, who've made so many sacrifices in recent weeks, as to what the future now might hold, but also for our frontline public services, so that they can plan for the various scenarios that are going to come in the next few weeks.
You see, calling for the government to publish a plan in some ways, though, is the easy bit. The difficult bit is working out what should be in that plan. So, my question to you is there not time for Labour to stick its neck out and actually say what it is that you would like to see? I mean, this is your chance to influence what could be the biggest decision that the government makes or this government will ever make. So what measures do you think should be looked at?
Well, firstly, we've been arguing about the reopening of schools for some weeks because every child having access to education is so important. We've also been arguing about looking at the different sectors of our economy, which could see restrictions more likely to be lifted than others, and of course the testing and tracing strategy that I've already mentioned. And I know that Keir Starmer will be speaking to the Prime Minister early this week. The Welsh Government has set out its ideas on an exit strategy and a formal document as well. But what wouldn't be appropriate, Sophie, I think, is to set up some sort of rival plan. We will work with the government. We want to do this by agreement. We want to support the exit strategy. We went into lockdown with a political consensus, with that shared objective of minimising loss of life. I think it's important to try to come out of lockdown with a consensus too.
So just to be clear, the first thing you mentioned there was schools. What does Labour think should happen with schools?
Well, we're not asking the government for the impossible. We're not asking for, at the moment, a precise date. What we are simply asking for is a roadmap as to how we can get our education system back up and running.
So what do you think that roadmap should be? I mean, you can see other countries doing things differently. Germany prioritising older children about to sit exams. You can see France prioritising nurseries and primary schools. What do you feel the roadmap should be?
Well, we're not going to, sort of, as I say, start setting out specific details in that way.
But anyone can say that they want to see a roadmap when it comes to schools. I mean, the difficult thing is coming up with ideas, isn't it?
Well, yes, but it is for the government to come up with the ideas. We will then, of course, discuss them and hopefully find a consensus on what they are. And incidentally, I would also say that the UK government shouldn't be pulling some sort of rabbit out of a hat. I'd like them to work with the devolved administrations. That's what I mean, work with the devolved administrations as well. Of course, here in Wales, I'm sat speaking to you, it will be a decision for the Welsh Education Minister. But I would like to see that by consensus. We want to see about the use of technology. We want to see whether it is, as you say, Sophie, particular age groups that might come first, particular parts of our education system. These are the kind of things we would want the government to look at. But I don't think it would be helpful just to simply set up a rival plan and start having that argument. Let's move forward by consensus. Let's see the government proposals. Let's discuss them next week. Let's see the expert advice, and let's try and move forward by agreement.
Now, contact tracing, of course, is going to be a big part of our lockdown exit strategy. You mentioned it a bit earlier in the interview, but of course it requires a certain number of people to download the app. Do you think people should be compelled to download the app if they can? Should there be fines if you don't, for example?
I think there has to be a strategy for how we can ensure there is a very large take-up of this app. I think it's obvious that we should need to do that. We're willing to discuss different options for it. However, I think there are other matters we need to take into account here as well. Not everybody has a smartphone in the first place to which you could download the app. So what is the government's strategy in relation to that? But secondly, as well, there are also issues around privacy and security. To give you an example, Sophie, there are people for whom location services on their mobile devices are turned off for particular safety reasons and keeping themselves safe. So we need a strategy and a parliamentary oversight, I would suggest, as well, in terms of overall how this is going to work too.
Now, as a Shadow Home Secretary, I'm interested to get your view on the policing of the lockdown, because it does feel sometimes there's been a bit of a postcode lottery of policing, even individual officers interpreting things differently. The Crown Prosecution Service says it's going to review every charge brought under the emergency coronavirus laws. Is that a good idea? And have you had any concerns about the way the lockdown's been policed?
I think the Crown Prosecution Service are sensible to do that, because we are asking the police to police something that was completely new and probably was unthinkable even 4 or 5 months ago. But in general terms, I think the police have done an excellent job. And I'm not saying that there haven't been particular incidents to which you have alluded in your question, Sophie, but we've also got to be clear that we must back our frontline police here. They've been asked to do this by us. We passed the Coronavirus Act through Parliament back at the end of March with this sweeping set of powers to the government. We then asked the police to go out and enforce the lockdown. I think by and large they've done an excellent job, and I think we really need to be thanking and backing our frontline officers for all they've done in very, very difficult circumstances.
Now, it's always hard in interviews to talk about anything other than coronavirus, it feels. But I am keen to touch on just a couple of other points. Now we have you on the programme, a new opposition, a new Shadow Cabinet team. And I wanted to ask you about immigration as Shadow Home Secretary. Do you feel that free movement of people should continue after we leave the European Union?
Well, I think what we will be doing over the next few months and years coming into setting out our immigration policy at the next general election is listening to the concerns of people. But whilst, of course, we'll set out that detail in due course, I can set out some broad principles. And I think, firstly, rights about living, working, studying in other countries are very important. They're part of the internationalism that's in Labour's DNA. I think fairness is also going to be so important. We will never treat people as statistics in our immigration system. We will always treat them as people. And of course, justice is important as well. It's not some abstract principle. We've seen in the Windrush scandal what happens when we lose sight of that in our immigration system. So they are the broad principles that we'll be drawing on as we move forward to set out our position in more detail in the years ahead.
So those are the broad principles, but I am interested in the specifics as well. I mean, Keir Starmer in the leadership contest said that he thought Labour should argue in favour of free movement of people. So do you think free movement of people should continue?
We will always make the positive case for immigration and the great benefits that immigration has brought to our country. But clearly,
it's not quite what I asked.
But firstly, we have left the European Union, and the transition period will have ended by the time we get to the next general election. It will be this government that will have negotiated that new agreement with the European Union. We're also going through the coronavirus crisis, where vast parts of the world are in lockdown. You can't even travel from one part of the world to another. So we will, of course, be shaping our immigration policy around those events and those changes. And by the way, I would also say that what we've seen in the coronavirus crisis is the value of people, our refuse collectors, our shop workers, our nurses, our local government workers, all of whom are doing a wonderful job keeping our country running, where their salary doesn't reflect their value. And the government is trying to convince us that anyone earning less than £25,600 a year is unskilled. Some of us didn't need reminding that that wasn't the case. But if anyone did need reminding, I think we've seen in the coronavirus crisis the value of people who are on salaries that are lower than that, and that doesn't reflect what they do.
Just finally as well, the other thing we've seen, of course, in the coronavirus crisis is that those from BME backgrounds appear to be more at risk of serious complications. Now, Public Health England has given Trevor Phillips a role into the inquiry into why that might be. Now, some campaigners have protested that he shouldn't be part of that inquiry because of past comments he's made about Muslims. Others say that this is a man who spent his life campaigning for racial inequality. It's his friends in the Labour Party who should be sticking up for him. Keir Starmer says that the government should engage with the concerns of the campaigners. Is that the right decision, or should Keir Starmer be supporting Trevor Phillips?
No, Keir Starmer is quite right to say that we should be engaging with those concerns. I think that's entirely the right approach given the issues that have been raised. But I should also say that we as a Labour Party have asked Doreen Lawrence, who's got obviously this great campaigning history in this area after such a tragic event with the murder, of course, of Stephen Lawrence. She will be looking at it for us. And this is a central issue going forward, looking at the impact of the coronavirus and its disproportionate impact, it seems, on BAME communities, which is something we do need to learn the lessons of going forward.
OK, Nick Thomas-Symonds, thank you very much for being on the programme and talking about a variety of things. Thank you.
Thank you.